Hey there, it's Marley. Welcome back to my booktube channel. Today we are going to be doing my January reading wrap-up. So before we get into the book reviews, let's do a quick little overview of my reading stats for the month. So I actually had a pretty great reading month for the first month of the year. I normally read about 8 books on average per month, but this month I actually read 14 books. I am way ahead of my goals, my reading schedule, which is really nice. In terms of pages read, it was around 4,369, which again is above average for me. My average rating was a 4-star, which is also very excellent. Books acquired 13. Which is quite a lot of books to buy in 1 month, 13 books. So hopefully we can bring that number down. Hopefully we are not seeing a trend of buying that many books every single month. You know what that means. We're gonna have a book haul coming up soon. And then own voices, we had 2 novels that I put as own voices. Then for genres, we had 35% were thriller, which I think is part of why I read so much this month. Thrillers just tend to be very quick reads for me, so that kind of tracks. And then for fantasy and romance, they came in at 28% each. And then we had sci-fi at 7%. In terms of format, I did 50-50. Half were physical and half were ebooks, which is pretty typical for me. In terms of whether they were, adult or YA, 57% were adult books and 42% were young adult. However, I did read a couple manga, which you'll see, and I kind of have trouble saying whether they're adult or YA when it comes to manga. In terms of author gender, I read from 71% female authors and then 28% male authors, which is a little bit more male authors than I normally read, I feel like. In terms of author status, to me, I read from repeat authors 57% and then new to me authors 42%, so pretty even. In terms of year published, I really just read from a huge range of years. I read 1 2024 release, 3 from 2023, and then it just kind of goes back from 2022 all the way back to 2002. So of the books I've acquired so far this year, which we know was quite a few, I spent around $120. I've read 17% of them, which I think means 2 of them. So I feel like getting 13 books for $120 is pretty good. All right, now let's get into the reviews. I thought how I would organize this is that I would talk about the 3 mangas I read first and get those out of the way, and then we would get into the regular novels. And I'll talk about them from worst to best, as always. So first up, we have Demon Slayer by Koyoharu Gotouge. I'm so sorry about that pronunciation. Basically, my best friend Ali loves manga. She's the reason I've read it in the past on my channel. So I decided to do a little bit of a challenge again for myself where I read 3 of her manga that I borrowed from her, and then I would decide like which ones I wanted to continue. Sorry to say, this is the one that I am not really interested in continuing. I really thought that I would because I feel like I have heard people talk about Demon Slayer, but this was the most disappointing one for me, coming in at a 3-star. This is about this guy and he has this family and then they all get slaughtered by demons. They live in a world where like demons exist. So he comes back and his whole family's been slaughtered except for his sister. But then he realized his sister, she didn't die, but she got turned into a demon. So he is trying to save his sister and have her become human again, see if that's like possible. And then he runs into some people who are demon slayers and he's kind of like training to become one. So it actually does sound like a pretty cool concept, but it was more the execution that disappointed me. I found I was getting bored. I found that there was like 0 humor, and obviously the nature of the story is kind of dark and upsetting, but there's definitely manga that I've read or stories I've read in general that have dark themes but are still funny, like the ones I'm going to talk about next. So I feel like if it doesn't have humor, if it's boring me, I can't justify continuing with it. Next up, we have Hell's Paradise by Yuji Kaku. This is actually a reread. I read it a couple years ago when I was trying out manga and I quite liked it, but since it's been a few years, I wanted to reread it and see if I was still interested in it. And good news, I am. I stuck with my 4-star rating that I gave it last time. This is a cool idea because we're following this assassin. He's known as the hollow, I think, because he's so heartless and so like hollowed out of emotions. So he has this crazy reputation for being this crazy killer, but he has been caught recently. They are making him fight for his freedom by entering this competition with all these other assassins to find this elixir of life. I forget what exactly they call it, but it's like an elixir that gives you immortality. So he is on this island competing to find this elixir to win his freedom. There's some other interesting details about his character, like he has a wife, whatever. We don't have to get into the details, but I found that even though this book also had some darkness, it also had some humor, it has some action. The only thing I don't love is that it seems to be putting some unnecessary nudity in for our female character, which, as I said, I don't think is really needed. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in continuing this and seeing where this one goes. The last manga I read was the first issue, or first volume, sorry, of Fullmetal Alchemist. This is by Hiromu Arakawa, and of course I've heard people talk about Fullmetal Alchemist. I believe it's also an anime that people really love. I just find that I'm probably more likely to read manga than I am to watch anime. Yeah, I had an excellent time with this one. I rated it 4.5 stars, so it was my favorite, and of course I am interested in continuing it. I'm sure you guys probably have already heard about this, but it's about these two brothers, and they are alchemists, obviously. When they were, I guess, a bit younger, their mom died, and so they attempted to bring their mom back to life, but they were not successful, and they ended up actually losing parts of their body. Like the one brother, who's not pictured here, has like lost his entire body, so he's just in this kind of like robot armor. And then we have our other character here who has like a robotic arm and leg. It's basically just them going on some different adventures. Like, this is the collector's edition, which I think is a little bit different from the regular volumes. But in this one, each chapter is kind of like its own separate little story. They are all kind of connected still, but it definitely did feel very much like different little stories for each chapter. There's definitely a lot of like darkness, and one story really upset me, having to do with a little girl and a dog. If you know, you know. But I just thought it was really good, and it did have that humor and everything that I look for as well. So yeah, I recommend this, and I'm excited to, you know, continue with these two series. All right, as for the novels I read, let's start out with Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. This is a rom-com, but is it? Is it? I was a little worried going into this book because I haven't heard the best things, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars, which is not necessarily a bad rating, but it was my least favorite book that I read this month. Weirdly enough, I read it in one day. So kind of weird. I disliked this book, but then like read it in a day. It's a very weird contrast. Anyways, as for the plot, we are following our main character who works on this comedy sketch show. It is essentially SNL, yes. She has worked here for years. She's not one of the comedians who like acts on screen. She is purely a writer. Okay, so basically the whole book is separated into 3 sections. The first part is so focused on the routine with this show. We are getting so much information of what it's like to work on this show, the weekly schedule, the crazy hectic hours. And our main catalyst of the book is that this guest star comes on the show, right? Because there's always a celebrity guest star every week. This week it's Noah Brewster, who is like a pop star. He's a musician. So Sally has to work with him on some of his sketches. And at first she kind of has a negative opinion of him because he's coming in as this pop star. She kind of has negative kind of stereotypes about him. Then they actually work on this sketch together, and they actually end up bonding a little bit more and having some nice moments. However, in the first part, like I said, it really wasn't feeling that much like a romance. It was like that was just a side plot, and it really felt just more like a literary fiction, kind of women's fiction story. And it was just not funny enough as well, considering it's called a romantic comedy and considering it takes place on like a comedy set. It was just not funny enough. It was, I guess, trying to be funny, but it just was not really working. I've read way funnier books. Then we get to the second part, and this lost me. This part was really losing me. Essentially, in part 2, we are only seeing emails between the 2 main characters. And I don't mean just like cute little quippy emails. I'm talking they are just like info dumping, or they're just thought dumping huge paragraphs of what they're doing, because oh yeah, this book takes place over COVID and the author included that. So both of them, because they work in show business or whatever, like they don't have a lot going on, so they are just like talking so much to each other over these emails, talking about the most monotonous stuff of just how they're spending their day. She's taking care of her dad, he's doing whatever. Like, it was so boring. I was like, why are we focusing on this? And then the third part, I guess this was probably the best part, but then it becomes an actual romance novel. Then we're actually seeing them together and like being a couple and like building that romance. But overall, it was just not the best. Again, clearly it wasn't hard for me to read because I read it in one day, but it was kind of one of those things where I'm like, let's just get this over with, you know? So that's romantic comedy. Next up, we have Wildcard by Marie Lu. This is the sequel to Warcross. I read this a couple years ago, I think for like a themed reading blog. You know, I enjoyed that book. I want to say I gave it 4 stars. It's a YA dystopian sci-fi from, you know, that era where we had a lot of those, inspired by Hunger Games, Divergent, and all that stuff. It was pretty decent. It was about this girl who's like an orphan. She became this little hacker because this world is basically like a digital world. I think it's like, oh, it's hard for me to remember, but I think everyone has these glasses that transport them into this total like virtual world, which is how most people do most of their like living. And she's this great hacker and bounty hunter, finding criminals and stuff like that on the dark web. Yes. And then there is this yearly challenge or something called Warcross, and she gets invited to join, and she accidentally hacks her way into the competition. And the guy who runs it is like, hey, I want to bring you in, and I'm going to bring you in as my little spy because I think there's some criminal hacker trying to hack into the competition. I want you to find them, blah, blah, blah. There's a romance between her and the guy who runs the thing. I was never completely sold on the romance. The romance didn't work as much for me as it did in, you know, some of the other similar YA series, but we have some cute like friendships, interesting plot. There was like a big plot twist kind of cliffhanger at the end. So I went in thinking I would enjoy this book. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy it as much as I did the first one. Part of that could have been that I gave too much time in between, so that's on me, but I also just think the story went off in like a different direction that I wasn't really pleased with. It was almost like we completely restarted this whole series. It felt like she was rewriting history a little bit, and then I was just bored. Like, I was just bored, and I don't know if it's the book's fault completely or if it's just that I'm over the whole YA dystopian like moment that we had. I gave this 3 stars. I feel like I would be interested in reading more Marie Lu, but I don't know. Next up, we have Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. I read another book by her last month, and I was definitely more intrigued by this one because it had this cool like time travel element. I will say ultimately I was disappointed by this book, but I still overall enjoyed it. We have our main character who is a wife. She, you know, has her husband. She has her son who's about 18 years old. And we open up where she's waiting for her son to return home from a night out. She looks out the window, sees her son literally murder a random man. So she is shocked, like this is her little boy, like she has no idea why he's done this. Next thing she knows, next morning she wakes up and it's the day before the murder. So she's very confused. Essentially each day she keeps waking up earlier and earlier before the murder. So it has this cool time travel element. She's trying to solve the mystery backwards, I guess. She's trying to go back and see like what led to her son doing this. Can she stop it? It starts out pretty interesting, and then it kind of started to drag on a little bit. I felt like she wasn't really finding things out every day, so it got a little bit boring at times. Then it kind of got a little philosophical, right? Thinking about parenting and the impact you have on your kid and all this. Very reflective. And then the ending was abrupt, I guess. I don't know. I just feel like it was a pretty decent book, but it just got to be a little bit slow, a little bit too boring. But again, still interested in reading more from this author, but like I wish this one was a little better. Then I read Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. I actually read, we're gonna get to it later, but I read the 5th volume of Heartstopper and then I read this, and I think that was like a good order to do. But basically this is a little short novella, it's very short, about Nick and Charlie, which of course is the main couple from Heartstopper, and it takes place like further into their relationship when Nick is going to be be leaving school soon for university, and they're very much dealing with the angst of having to be separated soon, which you also kind of see in Heartstopper Volume 5. But of course, this is not a graphic novel. This is a book. So this was the first time seeing them in this format. Looking at Goodreads reviews, I kind of agree with them that this couple works better in the graphic novels. In this, it was a little bit jarring being in their heads so much rather than just seeing the, you know, the pictures and stuff. Me describing graphic novels as looking at pictures and stuff. But it also got very like angsty. It got a little bit too angsty. I'm like, where's my sweet boys? Like, this is getting kind of intense. But in a way, I feel like maybe it's a little bit refreshing to see them like that because they are so sweet most of the time. And like, of course, no relationship's gonna be like that all the time. But ultimately, I gave it a 4-star, which is the first piece of media from Alice Oseman I haven't given 5 stars. Thinking about it, I probably could have maybe given it less, but like, I don't want to. But yeah, I think if you've read the Heartstopper books, then you could probably pick this up. As I said, it's pretty short. You can read it literally in one day. Yeah, that's Nick and Charlie. Continuing with my 4-star reads, we have The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. This is a thriller book I actually read for a reading blog this month where I read my 5-star prediction thrillers. Obviously, this was not 5 stars, but it was still overall quite enjoyable. So we're following 2 main characters initially. We have this guy who is at an airport. He's drinking. This woman approaches him. They start drinking together and just chatting. And he ends up sharing that he's really upset with his wife because she's cheating on him. And he ends up kind of accidentally saying that he wishes he could kill her. And then instead of just kind of moving on from that comment, Rose, I think her name was Rose, goes, oh yeah, like I would help you with that. They start like planning and scheming to kill his wife together, and it seems like maybe they have a little thing going on. That's the initial premise. That's probably all I should say because that's all I knew going into it. It definitely veers off from that. We also find out a lot about Rose's past. I hope her name is Rose because I keep calling her that. I think it is. We find out a lot about her past through flashbacks and stuff. It was very interesting. We have a lot of plot twists throughout. It's kind of that classic trope that we've been seeing a lot recently in books of like following serial killers and kind of seeing why they do that. Unfortunately, the ending just really kind of upset me. It was very abrupt. It left it kind of open-ended and not clear where the audience just has to kind of like think about how they interpret it and what they think happens. And that's not what I wanted. Like, it just didn't work for me, the ending. So I think I will read the sequel that came out recently and hopefully that will like clear the air a little bit. But overall, I did like this, but I'm not interested in reading more from this author, which you can hear more about in my blog if you want to check that out. I also read Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney in that same video. Her 2 previous books have been 5 stars that I've read. This one, unfortunately, I didn't enjoy as much, but I still overall quite liked it, obviously, to give it 4 stars. It's a cool concept where we have a main character who's in a coma at the beginning of the book. She had some sort of car accident, so she is unconscious, but like her mind isn't. Like, she's asleep, but like her mind is kind of conscious and she's hearing what people are saying around her when different people come to visit her and stuff. But she's kind of sketched out because she's like, why am I able to hear? And she's like, why am I here? She doesn't know if she can trust her husband, in a classic like domestic thrillers kind of thing. But then we're also seeing a different timeline. We're seeing her journal entries when she was a kid and kind of what she went through back then, some trauma. Oh, and then we have a third timeline where we're seeing a week before she gets in a coma. So we're kind of seeing where her life was before this accident and what maybe led to this accident and who's responsible. I was very invested throughout. I'm like, what's the connections gonna be between the different timelines? Like, why is she doing this stuff she did in the past? What led to this stuff in the future? We have some different players, you know, her sister, ex-boyfriends, different things. Some good twists that hit. But then again, the ending kind of was like, ugh. And then also there was like a graphic assault scene that just kind of was like out of nowhere. Like, I didn't think I was reading Karen Slaughter, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of thrillers, a lot of basic thrillers like don't go that much into like graphic scenes. So I really wasn't expecting that and I really did not enjoy that. There were just a couple things that were off with this book where it couldn't be perfect for me. All right, the one 2024 release I read was The Fury by Alex Michaelides. I actually did a little like TikTok vlog. Again, I'll always have my TikTok linked below if you want to go watch that. I read it in one night. I read it in one night. It's actually pretty short. I think it's literally only 300 pages right on the dot. Yeah, and his writing, Alex Michaelides, he wrote The Patient, he wrote The Maidens, sorry, The Silent Patient. I gave both of those 5 stars. They're some of my favorite thrillers of all time, and I read those super, super quickly. Same with this one. His writing so addicting, so quick to read. He always has these short chapters. It's just, as I said, read in one sitting. But I gave it 4 stars because it was ultimately a little bit disappointing for me. Maybe my expectations were too high because of his previous books, but something was just a little bit off in this book that it was not exactly perfect. Okay, so for the plot, we open up, we know that there's going to be a death. We know that it's going to be a group of people on this Greek island and someone's going to die and there's going to be a murderer. Classic Agatha Christie whodunit kind of situation. But then we get to the first chapter and we have like a everybody in my family has killed someone kind of situation where our main character, our protagonist, narrator, is speaking directly to us, breaking the fourth wall, saying how he's going to tell us this story from his perspective. He's writing it out. And instantly I'm like, I'm going to be comparing this to Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, which was an excellent murder mystery book, because that one was very, very funny, along with having, you know, great twists and kind of critiquing the murder mystery genre or like making fun of it kind of thing. This one just couldn't hold up to that. Like, it was not as funny, and partway through it kind of changes. So our main character is Elliot. He is a playwright. I won't get into the details of his life, but there's a lot going on there. He's best friends with this famous actress. She is the one who owns this little Greek island and invites everyone there. So we have the famous actress, her husband, her son's like 18, like he's an adult, Elliot, who's best friends with her, another actress friend, and then this man who works on the island for them and like upkeeps it kind of thing. So that's our group. We know one of them's gonna die. It's kind of obvious from the start who's gonna die. So we're kind of wondering why and who and how. We're having flashbacks, I guess, throughout, but leading up, and then the book got kind of repetitive. It was like he was purposely keeping stuff from us and then revealing it at certain times. Like, the main character was untrustworthy, which is kind of the point. But even though I was reading it so quickly and like technically enjoying it, I was kind of like, I don't really like where this is going. And then when we had our twists, I don't know, like, I guess they were shocking and kind of unique, but I didn't really like them. That's like the best way I can explain it, is that I didn't really like the twist that we had. I didn't like our main character. I've read from unlikable characters before. I've read from, you know, morally gray characters before. I feel like a lot of times you can still kind of root for them because you're in their head, so you kind of still like them. But with this one, it's like, I didn't like our main character. I didn't care about him. And then things happened at the end and I was like, so the way I'm talking about it is kind of negative, but I mean, for a book that I read this quick, like, obviously it's not that bad. If you liked his previous books, you know, check it out. I kind of respect that he has such differences in his books. Like, this is not similar to his other books by any means. Although he does have a spoiler for The Silent Patient in this. Like, at first, so if you've read his first 2 books, sorry, I'm going on like such a rampage with this book. In The Maidens, he has like a shout out to the Silent Patient, but it's not spoilery. It's just like, oh, they're in the same universe. Like it's a little Easter egg. So in this one, I thought that was happening too. A character from The Maidens was in this, and I was like, oh, like that's kind of cute, you know, he's keeping that going. But then it spoils The Silent Patient. So I'm like, I don't think you should be doing that in your books. So just as a warning, if you haven't read his other books, read them first and then this one, just in case you pick up on the spoiler. Okay, enough of this one. Then, as I already said earlier, I did read Heartstopper Volume 5, and I give this one 5 stars. I just give all of these cute little graphic novels 5 stars. We're following Nick and Charlie, blah, blah, blah. They have this really cute, great love story. By this point, they have actually been through some hard times together as well. Charlie's eating disorder, some mental health issues. We're kind of continuing with some mental health stuff. They're having some conversations about their codependency, about Nick going off to college soon. These real issues that a lot of teenagers are dealing with. So I think it was very, very well done. It was great. It was heartwarming, all that stuff, along with having these emotional, kind of upsetting things happen. Just great. Just this series is going great. It's perfect. Recommend. Another 5-star book I had was Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I've been making my way through this series for the first time time. I, of course, grew up watching the movies and loved them, but yeah, it's my first time reading the books. This one I gave 5 stars. It was my favorite book so far, I think, because we're starting to get a little bit different from the movies. In the first 3 books, I was like, okay, so these are literally the movies, which is nice to know that they had such faithful adaptations. And the first 3 movies are probably my favorite movies, so it was just kind of hard to compare them when I enjoyed the movie so much. But this one, you know, there's some characters that weren't in the movies, there's some plot points that weren't in the movies, so it was a little bit more interesting for me to read these different things I wasn't expecting. And the 4th movie is not necessarily my favorite, so it was able to kind of beat the movie for once, you know what I mean? It is quite long, like they're starting to get a bit lengthy. I mean, it's just a good time. Like, it's such a fun world, and definitely upsetting. I mean, Cedric, like, it just hits so hard. But anyways, we don't need to talk about that anymore. Okay, my top 2 favorite books of the month. One's a romance, one's a thriller. First up, we have The Bodyguard by Katherine Center. I rarely give full 5 stars to romances, so that just shows you how much I adored this book. Hannah is our main character, and she is actually a bodyguard as her profession, which is a little bit unexpected. Like, she doesn't look like your typical bodyguard. She's kind of underestimated a lot, especially because of her gender as well. She's going through some hard stuff. Like, her mom has recently passed away. She wasn't the closest with her mom, so she also feels kind of sad about that. And her boyfriend literally dumps her right after her mom dies, so she's going through it. But she's a little bit of a workaholic, and she's like, give me my next assignment. Like, I don't want time off for this. Like, I just want to keep working. I need a distraction. So her boss ends up giving her this assignment guarding this Hollywood star, Jack Stapleton, famous actor. He is visiting town because his mother is sick, so they are keeping an eye on him because he's known to have a few stalkers. Hannah is not happy because he asks her to pretend to be his girlfriend, so his mom and his family doesn't know that he has bodyguards. He doesn't want to stress them out, especially with what they're going through already with his mom's illness. So she has to pretend to be his sweet little girlfriend, which she can easily fit into because she does look the part compared to everyone else that she works with that wouldn't really fit. So it's a fake dating situation, which I always love, even though there are these serious themes going on, of course, with the grief. It's so funny. It's so fun and lighthearted. I've said this before, but it reminds me of like a Sarah Hogel kind of thing, who's one of my favorite romance authors. She's very like silly, goofy, and that's what this book was giving as well, along with these really heartwarming moments with the 2 main characters. They help each other out so much when they're both going through this hard time, and it's just funny, and both of the main characters are just likable. The story was interesting because, of course, then we have some kind of action at the end, you know, like she's a bodyguard. There's some, don't want to spoil, but there's some action that ends up happening. It doesn't get too steamy. There's actually like no spice, so I actually wouldn't have minded if there was more, which is weird for me to say. The chemistry, like the story, like this was just a perfect romance for me. So I need to recommend this to everyone. If you've not read it yet, you need to. And then my favorite book of the month was No Exit by Taylor Adams. This was the 3rd book I read in my 5-star prediction reading blog. If you want to see my in the moment reaction to this book, definitely go check it out because I had a pretty like extreme reaction because I loved this book. It was such a fun reading experience. This is actually the first book I read this month, even though I'm talking about it last. It like impacted me so much. So okay, it's kind of a popular book, so you might know it already. We have our main character, forgetting her name now, Darby. Yes, how could I forget Darby? So anyways, she's this like college student. She's going home to visit her mom because her mom is dying of cancer. Very upsetting, but there is this huge snowstorm and she ends up having to pull over to the side of the road to this rest stop to kind of wait it out. When she gets there, there's a few cars parked there. There's a few different people that are already there. When she's outside trying to get a phone signal, she notices that there is a child in the back of one of the vehicles there, in the back of a van. And when she peeks in, the child is actually in like a dog crate. So clearly this child has been kidnapped by one of the other people that's in this rest stop. Very tense situation, and from there, like, it never stops. The tension, the action never stops the whole book. It's one of those books where it's all happening like in real time, like in 24 hours, whatever. So she, first of all, obviously has to figure out like which of these people is the kidnapper. Then she has to figure out how to survive when they're stuck there. They don't even know if help is coming. They can't even get away because of the snow. I've heard people talk about this for years. Of course, they've raved about it, but I don't even think the reviews I heard got across just how amazing this book is. Like, it's so stressful. It's so upsetting. There are twists throughout, but mainly it's very action-based, which is not my typical thing. Normally, I like the twists in thrillers. This still has some twists, but it's like mainly just non-stop like stress, action, trying to survive, a survival story. But then it's also like so, like, you get so connected to the characters too. And then the ending is just like very emotional. I was crying, and I rarely cry in a thriller, but I had to cry. Like, I was so moved by it. It's just one of the best books ever. So there you go. So there you have it. Those were the 14 books I read in January, in the first month of 2024. Let me know if you have any thoughts, especially if you've read any of these books. And I hope you had a great first reading month of the year too. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you've not already and follow me on my other platforms. I will see you in a new video soon. Bye.